seems to be close to time. Welcome. We have a couple of members I know are not going to be here tonight. Mary Ann's not going to be here tonight, and Adam emailed me, and he's not going to be able to make it tonight. And it looks like most of the rest of us are here. I don't see Erin, but hopefully she'll be coming in shortly. This is a real shifting gears for us because we've spent the last, 5 or 6 meetings receiving a lot of information and responding to your desires, and that I agree with. The focus tonight is really going to be for us to have conversation about what we've heard so far, about anything else we think we might need to know, about the facilitation process that the professional facilitator is going to take us through. So I think before we get into the discussion, I'd like to introduce Sheila Shockey. Sheila's back there in the striped top. She is the lead of the company that the city has retained to provide some facilitation and report writing assistance for us. She's here tonight, I think, mainly to listen and try to understand the issues as we see them so that she can be better prepared for our next meeting, which will be the Saturday, September 26th, 8 a.m. to noon meeting. Sheila, do you have anything you want to say, just kind of an opening? Feel free to.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for asking me to come tonight. And I'm looking forward to the meeting on the 26th, and I believe we have a follow-up on October 7th. And really what my job on this project is to just be your guide through a conversation and help you really think through some of the issues that you have before you, and ultimately put together some recommendations that you can move forward to the City Commission with. And so at the end of our process, you won't have all your recommendations done, I don't think. You'll have something to kind of begin to start to work in more detail on. And so that's our objective over the next 2 sessions. So I look forward to it. And I'm just going to kind of listen to you all tonight and see where you're at and what your issues are. And I look forward to the 26th.
Any questions for Sheila right off the bat? We've talked a little bit. I met with Sheila and a couple of the staff earlier today, and we talked about some ways to do the public input session, and we may talk about that a little bit as time goes on. For members of the public that are here, this is a public meeting, and you're very welcome. Thank you for coming. The way that we've been handling public comment is very informally. If in the process of the discussion you have something you would like to say, if you would raise your hand. It might be easier if you're sitting over here so I can see you. And I will recognize you. The one request that we have of you is that you try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. And that they be germane to the topic under discussion. No, let's just kind of wait until we got to get going here, and you can make comments as you see fit. I had David copy for us the draft work plan that was created a couple months ago, I guess now, which I still see as a draft. It was never to be cast in stone. But hopefully it's going to help take us through our discussion this evening to make sure that we're hitting all the major points. But if there are things that are not in these buckets that are important to you to talk about, please speak up about them and add them. This is not considered to be any sort of official or final list in the least. It's just a starting point for us, and hopefully will sort of keep us on topic. What I'd like to do is start by going around and having each one of us just talk for a minute or so about what you think are the key issues and concerns that you have at this point in the process. Make sense? So we're just trying to, I guess, get some things out on the table. What we'll do after we kind of do the round robin is go through the outline more specifically and say, okay, let's look at laws, policies, guidelines, practices, and challenges. What are the things that we want to make sure to capture for that? Same thing with project prioritization. I think Mike has a little presentation he wants to give on that. Same with funding, same with citizen advisory. So we'll work through the topics, but I thought it might be useful to just, for everybody just to kind of make an opening statement, just to check in to see where you are in your thinking about our work and what you think are the key issues, at least in your opinion. Bonnie, would you be willing to start?
Yes, but nothing really comes to mind.
Okay.
It seems like we're going through a process that I hope will all make sense at the end, and I don't have any particular concerns about it.
Okay.
First, I'd like to say that when I was on 7th Street going past the Eldridge Hotel on Vermont Street, there was a semi-truck running the red light with a pedestrian present. Just off the top of my head. I was brainstorming. I was trying to formulate questions for policies that I'd like to see, but I better be sure I know what I'm talking about before I do that. And I guess my really, really big question is, how much is planning synchronized with production? And it comes up a lot in city commission meetings that people are saying, well, we don't follow Plan or Horizon 2020 anyway. And so how is it that we decide to do our projects? Does it relate back to Transportation 2040? Does it relate back to complete streets? Does anybody look at that besides planning? Or is it just for new development? That's my overall concern.
Okay. Charlie?
Well, without much warning, I have 4 things. I think my biggest concern is that we create recommendations that are actionable. And by that, what I imagine is if we don't have a commissioner that's on the task force. And it concerns me because I think often the champion that's going to see the task force recommendations come to reality is a commissioner who's on the committee. And so that just is sort of in the back of my mind all the time. Are we doing something that's really going to change the way business is done because we have a commissioner who is believing in the product that we develop, and then they're going to present it or be part of that kind of, let's get this done, next step. Then in terms of all the different ways we've broken the work apart, I have a concern that we might miss out on the synergy that is created by trying to deliberately integrate the recommendations. And by that I mean, when I think about an advisory committee, I also want to think about whether that advisory committee has any authority to make recommendations around funding. And so we could just talk about funding in its own place, but there are certain advisory committees the city has that actually do have that authority. And I think it'd be helpful to say that this committee ought to have that authority. It would really give it a lot more, I think, credibility in the community than, for example, the Bicycle Advisory Committee that doesn't have anything like that. Not that I know of. And then the third thing is the current discussion about Castle Drive. it has me yearning for an advisory committee that's going to somehow provide a buffer for, or a place for that kind of broader engagement of all interested parties. And I think it could easily be that our outcome looks like it's the constellation of non-motorists. And that worries me because I think then we're going to continue this kind of fight that's going on in the community right now. You know, Castle just happens to be an example of it. So I'd like to see something that's going to produce what people would regard as a balanced approach to making decisions and making recommendations. One where it doesn't feel like it's beholden to certain interests. And I know it's going to be tough for us because what got us here was probably our passion around bike and pedestrian issues. So, and then the last thing is, I think, while this is a big step forward to even have a task force and potentially have an advisory committee that addresses these things ongoingly, there's still a need, I think, that we need to recognize, and that's we need advocates in the community. And this isn't done when suddenly there's a committee that is in place. And you know, the Bicycle Advisory Committee is an example where they have, you know, a committee, yet here we are still fighting for this. So somehow it'd be useful to understand the role of this committee in actually doing advocacy, or if it feels as if it actually can't do that because now it's got this kind of official status. And I've heard people on the BAC say they can't advocate, which seems sort of surprising. So I think that role of an advisory committee, whether they can do advocacy or whether they're there as representatives of advocates, I think that needs to be fleshed out. And I think we all just need to recognize that this is a great milestone for us, but it's probably there's a lot more work to be done. And it's not just work with staff and commissioners, it's the community that hasn't fully bought into sharing the road. There you go.
I guess the first thing I'd say is that I feel pretty optimistic. I think that we've made a lot of progress, and I think we need to celebrate that and recognize it, and at the same time recognize that there's a lot more that can be done and should be done, and so you know, I'd like to remember that, because when I see a new bike lane or you know, additional infrastructure that goes up, and it's going at a much faster rate than it ever did in the past, and I'm optimistic about that. I think the thing that probably I've spent the most time thinking about so far, because I'm in the advisory committee structure subgroup, and so I spent a little bit of time with that, and as well as having been on the Bicycle Advisory Committee and in the past, and thinking about that one of the things that might be missing in our outline is the advisory committee structure and organizational structure within city staff, and how that all fits together, you know, as far as looking at some of the other communities and looking at, you know, how some of that was structured, and just considering whether, you know, the organization that we have at this point is the best, or if there's other things that, you know, that could be done, and you know, looking at it that way. You know, I'll go back to the first night and say, you know, the goal for a platinum community, or goal of platinum, or what, you know, whatever, is that's still it for me, is that we don't just stop, you know, to get to, you know, one step further, that, you know, that it's an ongoing process, and that, you know, hopefully what this committee can represents is a step, you know, in terms of the framework to make that work be ongoing, and that, you know, this is not the end point, it's really just the structure.
Okay. Hey, Dee?
Okay, I come from a bicycle interest, definitely, and I've bicycled a lot. I commute to work. I'd kind of like, and I love all this long-term planning and the new developments, taking into account sidewalks and bike trails and lanes and so forth. But I also am somewhat optimistic in that it's certainly possible to bicycle now to commute to work. I've commuted to work for 8 years now. True, I only live 2.5 miles, but I've never had a serious accident. I'm extremely defensive, and I have lots of lights and things like that. But I'd like there to be more education so that people will even attempt it now, because it is possible. And if there are more people out there doing it, they'll kind of see what can be done and how it be more advocates as to how it could be better. And there's certainly a lot of room for improvement. I almost got run over at the street light here too, just coming over tonight. They don't want to yield the right of way on a crosswalk, yeah. And that happens frequently, but if you're alert, and the more of us that are out there, the more visible we are, and I do appreciate the sharrows on the road. At first I thought that was kind of hokey, but the more I'm out there riding with them, the more I appreciate it. I think, this shows that I have a right to be here, even though it isn't going to really protect me. It's still a good thing, I think. I love this idea that Charlie made up, kind of listing all these different advisory committees that already exist in the city, and kind of how they all relate to the ideas that we're looking at, and if we can't consolidate all this a little and get everybody looking at it. So that's my views, I guess.
I haven't shared that yet.
Oh, you haven't shared it yet?
I was-
Yeah. Here they
And
come.
it needs some explanation, but
Should I pass it
you can
around?
go ahead and pass it.
Sorry about that.
That's fine.
You're on my subcommittee, so.
Yeah.
Just so the public knows, this is Dave Cronin in the pink shirt. He's our staff liaison, so I think I'm going to skip him unless you have something you want to add right now. Erin?
I was going to say, as far as just kind of repeating what I've heard, but also when I came back to Lawrence and growing up here, I've often felt that the people that we are not, that want to just be able to bike and walk to get where they're going, often choose not to because of safety factors. And I think it's important for our work to be the beginning of ensuring that we're allowing more people that want to bike and walk to get out there and do it. And so I kind of look at the task force as the beginning, not as something that will end in
4 moments.
be completed. It's just the beginning. My concerns as far as the task force goes for me is that I feel like I haven't done much research and don't know really where to start. Well, I guess I do, just kind of wrapping my head around it and getting some of it done. So
Tonight might help you a little bit as we try to identify some key issues that most of us agree on that could take you down the road to some further study. Mike?
Or, yeah,
go
sorry.
ahead, Erin.
But just, it's like I really want to look around and see what's done other places and make sure that those recommendations and those thoughts are feasible to the, city leadership. And I think that's really important, but being sure that we're also thinking enough outside of the box that we're considering things that, say, we haven't done before in Lawrence that might be, good options.
Okay, great. Mike?
I think my feelings about this group spring from my prior professional life and I worked in government from when I was 17 years old until I retired in 2009. And a couple things were always motivations for me. One was to be a good steward of what the taxpayers provide. And so you just want to call that a good government idea. I felt like the people working in the government, and I was always in the executive branch, need to make good decisions, cost-effective decisions. And a lot of my education is related to mathematical stuff, so I got into economics and cost-benefit analysis and things like that. So helping us get some sort of empirical results rather than just emotional judgments, although there certainly are places for emotional judgments, and certainly there are places for political judgments where there isn't a great deal of empirical data. But I think when we can use empirical data, we should. And then the other theme, besides the good government theme, that I would like, let everybody know what my pet rock is. Really, my first job, other than sweeping things up and stuff, was to be a safety monitor. And I started that out a long time ago. And you kind of look at every situation you get into and you say, okay, what are the sources of hazards in this situation we're in? And clearly, when we're talking about bikes and pedestrians on roadways, it's pretty obvious. We got massive vehicles moving at high speed, and we got people who only can see in one direction. Some of them are young or disabled. So there's lots of hazards there. And so to me, the top thing that we have to have in any system that we put forward is that it has to be at least as safe as we are now, and if we can improve safety at a reasonable cost, let's do that. I'm not saying we should spend $1 billion to prevent one scraped knee or one bicycle flat tire. I'm certainly not saying that, but I am saying that safety is kind of my pet rock on all of these things that we look at. So I'm going to try and disclose my bias in this conversation here. And, if you want to say, okay, there's Mike going off on his safety thing again, then you'll be okay, that's fine. But that's where I'm coming from. Thanks.
Clint?
I'm happy that there are more people that are dedicated to these topics in a formal fashion, as we are tonight in each of these meetings, because I think it'll help the momentum of change, and the Complete Streets plan seems to have really good intentions, and so watching us develop and grow in this process is, I think, going to be really fascinating. And as we learn more and more, it seems like the deficits and needs in these areas are great and diverse, and so therefore should be the funding opportunities that are pursued and conversation regarding the relationship of that funding and prioritization seem to be really closely related and should be kind of developed together almost, it seems. As we see dedicated funding find other dedications after it kind of develops, and so in light of the needs that we know about in pedestrian and bicycle issues, it seems that as many possible sources should be pursued as necessary. And I really like the idea of sharing the road. I don't think that it's a polar issue, bicycle and pedestrian issues. I don't think that there's any opposition in that. The issues affect everybody, and so that any way that we can get that across, I think will help settle any qualms about where that money goes. If that the unity of us, of all of us, bicycle, pedestrian, motorists, whatever, can be emphasized in some way.
Okay, I've been thinking about a lot of these things and how they all go together, but one thing that I am thinking a lot more about than I thought I would when I came on this task force is sidewalk maintenance. I've picked up that this is an issue that staff would really like our help with. And so I think that's a challenge that we need to take up. What is in place now doesn't appear to be working very well, and I don't claim to know what it should change to, but I think we should very seriously consider how we can put a framework in place so that over time more of our sidewalks get improved, and in general the condition of them overall increases in the community. My other big thing is funding, and that's really, to me, where the rubber meets the road. We have a fantastic bikeway plan. We are working on a great regional pedestrian plan. We have a number of other plans, some of which we've heard about in our reports that support pedestrians and bicyclists, but there's a piece missing that is making those plans kind of nothing more than plans in certain senses. There is progress, it's very slow on certain things. So to me, if we can crack the nut of how to get some dedicated funding for sidewalk maintenance and for other pedestrian bicycle improvements, that in my mind could be the most significant achievement that we could have. So in all of the conversations, that's always in the back of my mind. Any other just general introductory comments? Would any of you from the public that are here like to make a short statement about what you believe are the key issues that we should be addressing? Okay, sure.
Hi, my name is Suzanne. I can't see you guys. I'm Suzanne Hampton, and I just moved here from the Bay Area about 3 months ago. And happy to be here. We love it here so far. I've gained weight since I've come here, I have to say, because I have a lot of trouble walking. We live in East Lawrence, and there's just nowhere to walk to the point of the sidewalks. And so that's one of the reasons I'm here. And I've been meeting with the folks at the senior center, the Clovis County Senior Center, and thought about also the economic development and business development aspects of making them more walkable and bikeable city. And so also to your point about the financial aspects, it seems like trying to get budget and monies together to fund some of these improvements in the short term, but then also looking longer term for investment for the future, along with the retirement, making Lawrence a retirement community that's attractive to people. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Newland. I don't know if this is the ideal time to raise this, but I'm on a fact-finding mission. You mentioned the bikeways, and I live over in Pinckney and have been there over 20 years, I guess. And about 3 weekends ago, noticed that there is a wide sidewalk about the size of a European road going down through Bircham and then stopping at the beautiful byway along the river. And I don't think this is the place to share feelings, but I have to say my initial feeling was one of being punched in the stomach. And since then I've taken informal polls around the neighborhood. Did you know it looks like it's being cleared for a huge sidewalk? And so far, no one has been happy about that. I'll just share that. And I keep saying, I'll get back to you, I'll get back to you. I've made calls, hit and miss, well, miss and miss. And this may be a miss tonight, but when I read in the Journal World about this meeting, I thought maybe there's someone here who can guide me. I called Parks and Rec, called the city, talked to one person in the streets, was given the name of someone in Levy, was told by a neighbor who works for the city, Levy guy's on vacation. He's not the guy in spite of what they told you, even if this has been paid for, I'm hoping that it can be reconsidered. I feel that the loss of however many thousands of dollars that may have already been paid for the work to pay that short walk along the river would be worth the loss over time. I'm also concerned about if there had to be a sidewalk there, maybe the Eagles lobbied for it, but if there had to be a sidewalk there, the maintenance of it, I'm certain someone considered erosion, of which there is much, and someone in the neighborhood actually years ago addressed the beaver problem until it was so much work that she called the city and said, hey, I'm ad hoc putting chicken wire around the trees down here. May I get some help? Because of course, with the loss of each tree, there was more erosion. But unless, and again, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm sad, I'm fearful. Lawrence does not seem like the kind of community where we are proactively spending money to take wilderness away from our community and away from our children, so many of whom are never going to experience that in their lifetime unless someone's taking them to Colorado or those kinds of things. But there is a vast difference, I would suggest, between walking on a trail, treading the earth and looking up at the trees, and that huge white sidewalk that looks like, I looked at it yesterday, it looks like I could drive my car on it. And unless there is a plan long-term to put retail in down there, I would suggest that this is a place where the bikers, like the ones when I walk up Clinton Arboretum, and that, most of them are very polite. They know the protocol, on your left, on your right. If they go whizzing by, easily at 20 miles an hour or something. I own about 5 bicycles and I biked here, but I would think that might be a 1,500 yards where the people in their fancy bike shoes, if they want to go that way, could get off and maybe walk. I would just desperately like to speak to anyone who's involved in this initiative. And again, I don't know what I'm talking about. It just looks like a sidewalk has been planned there, and I have heard something from a Uber in the city, but I'm hoping there might be some alternatives. So that's the primary reason I'm here. But I'm a walker and a biker, and I'm someone who's been hit by a car in Lawrence as a pedestrian. It hurts. It really hurts. And yeah, lines on streets, they cannot protect us. I worked for years in Trip Anderson's building across from the courthouse, and it was the running joke. Don't start walking in the crosswalk. It is a zone to be hit. Rarely would I ever stand there and have a car actually stop. It always startled me. So those, we all know that does not offer a lot of protection, and those confrontations between people and cars are horrific.
Well, thank you, Jennifer,
Thanks so
for your
much.
input. I think the thing to do would be for you to leave your email address with me, and I will try to assure that you get some answer to your question about the Bertram Parkway. I know some information, but not all, so I don't want us to get out of turn. The other thing is that our group at this point is really not addressing specific projects. We're involved in more policy planning, long-term funding planning, and things like that. But we can definitely try to make sure that you get some sort of response from the city. So thank you very much.
Marilyn, could I ask a question? Jennifer, the park that's right near Bertram Park that was just dedicated to the city, the Sandra Shaw Community Health Park, has a trail that also has concrete, and it previously was just a nature trail. Not many people knew it was a nature trail.
It wasn't even a nature trail.
I mean, I used to use it myself, and it was pretty unutilized, I'd say.
Not private property at the time.
It's,
You don't have to-
yeah, it was private
don't have to
property.
admit or deny.
It was private property, but you could still use it. And that property was clearly, it was improved, it was dedicated to the city, it became a new park with a nice trail. I think most people would agree. Is that type of use of nature, I guess I'm curious how that's different in your mind if you didn't think that was a good idea to put that park there.
I've utilized that trail as well. To me, there is something more sacred, majestic, and essentially American to a patch of river than a pond and fishing hole. And I am concerned, again, that there are very few other places with access in the urban area to experience the river. You know, on the other side, levees all day, very safe, great for mountain biking, everybody does. I'm just wondering about this little patch where you can listen to the wind through the cottonwoods and walk on earth, and concerned about children again who, well, I just question, I doubt the board's truly in the business of destroying wilderness or something that in this day and age approaches wilderness.
Excellent points. You know, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this one project, since that's not really the heart of our discussion tonight. Dee, did you have something quick that you wanted to say?
So, Jennifer, if I get you right, your main concern is the concrete as opposed to leaving it a dirt trail. Is that right? Or not? Is your main concern that it's a big slab of concrete as opposed to just a dirt trail?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Marilyn, another quick comment. I think we should note that communication is difficult whenever we approach these topics.
Now, what is?
Communication between people in the public and City Hall. There's no one place to go.
I apologize for inefficiencies.
I know it's not-
I'm trying to go by on the decibel.
No,
I think she's saying.
Carol's making a good point that one of the kind of implications of your story is that it's hard to know who at the city to talk to and to get a fast and correct answer. So we'll definitely make note of that. Other? Yeah, Michael?
I have a few comments that I'd like to make at the end of the meeting about something, but I'll just touch on a few things here if I may. Sustainability Action, the group I'm with, primarily focuses on bicycles, as you know probably, and primarily bicycles as transportation. And in that regard, there's some historical background of why we tend to put trails through parks and around the city and tree areas, whatever, rather than through the city. That's because historically funding has been through Parks and Recreation. They can spend it the way they want in those areas. That's shifting. Much of it is now focused within Public Works. But still, I think part of the focus of this group, I would hope, would focus on transportation for bicycles in areas that people go from home to store, to job, to school, not around in the outside outlying areas and through the parks. That's nice, but we have done a whole lot over the last 30 years in parks. We need to make up time as far as transportation bicycling goes. So that could shift if we have to reshift that focus. Another thing that this group might take as a goal, I guess, or a guideline is Vision Zero. You've probably heard about it. Other communities have officially adopted it. Basically, it's saying it's intolerable to have any pedestrian or bicyclist killed, period. And we need to do whatever it takes for that not to happen. And it doesn't have to be anything more than that. But another guideline could be, or actually maybe an objective, having the default standard speed limit in residential neighborhoods being 20 miles an hour. Right now it's 30, but that's a state statute,
Yes.
so it might be difficult to address, but
Yes.
you could look at that. Other than that, I'm just concerned, well, last week I mentioned some tools that could be used to get us to where we want to be, to try to evaluate how we want to spend money. Other things that will get us from here to there that I can think of primarily would be what Carol was alluding to, the coordination of the discussion and the design, the communication among city staff when any project in any day of the week is being worked on, that somebody from, and hopefully we would have a pedestrian bicycle coordinator / engineer on staff. That's another thing that would get us from here to there. That person, the traffic engineer, somebody in Parks and Rec, somebody from finance, whatever it takes, all are on the same committee, meeting weekly maybe, so that it's not just a citizen advisory board, which has been doing good work over the years, but primarily are not trained necessarily. They may have ideas like all of us do, but those people only meet once a month. They see, what, 2 or 3 projects maybe each month. It's not like having staff every week working on these things in a coordinated fashion. That would be a major step to get from here to there. Other than that, well, that's enough for now. I'll make a few things at the end. Thanks.
Well, I have a couple of things, not just the one I came in about.
Now, please tell us your name.
My name's Nancy Johnson. I live in Pinckney. We've lived here about 10 years. And my husband and I are both bicyclists. I'm a big-time walker. We have done long bicycle rides. My husband was about ready to leave on riding from Santa Fe to Missouri, into Missouri, 1,100 miles, about 2 weeks ago on Sunday, when he was going to take one last ride. You know how that goes. It's like that last ski run you do and you wish you never had. Anyway, we live close to the levee, and we, both of us are on the levee all the time. I'll just quickly, not a very good picture, but just quickly just zoom it around. That's my husband a couple days after this accident. He was going across, and this is not something you specifically deal with, just kind of put it in your head. I've already talked to this gentleman. It's been handled, so I will try to be brief. If you go across the bridge going out of the city, and you're on the west side of the bridge, you're on the bike pedestrian part of it, there's a very right angle down the cement approach to the levee to go west. And at least it's paved now. When we first moved here, it wasn't paved, but it's a very dangerous thing because it's just like that. And then down the hill, well, that's where he fell. And he's okay, I think. Had a broken hand, not doing this bike ride like we expected. Eyes looking better tonight than it has. Thank goodness he was wearing a helmet. But I came tonight wondering if that particular issue, which I think is going to be addressed, where we could possibly do, I hope anyway, a semicircle so that this is not an oblique right angle. That's one thing. I'm moving on from there. I don't know your name because I can't remember, but you sort of vaguely brought up the idea of looking at what other communities are doing. And having served on other boards for doing other things, looking at best practices, I'll call it that. Not reinventing the wheel all the time in what this community needs or others. How many communities are there in this United States that are in college towns, maybe about this size? And, you don't want to do exactly what they did in New York City, but maybe they've got some good ideas. But just, looking at what really worked and, as you say, thinking out of the box. Look around. There's a lot. It's amazing what you can come up with. One other thing. My understanding of the trail is that it was to be finished. It's not finished yet, right? It just ends. It's been like that for months. And so if anybody has any answers to that one, it just ends in Bircham Park. It was never completed, maybe because of the weather, maybe not, along the river. What's up? Anybody know?
Yeah, briefly, I can tell you that weather was a major factor.
Mm-hmm.
There are plans for that trail. I'm not the best person to speak about them.
Okay. Well, I'm not trying to pin anybody down, but I've always been curious about it. I use the inside-outside trail a lot. And because it has trees, which you just don't find trees here. We love Shawnee Mission Park and the 21 miles of Shawnee Mission Park. And so, you know, if we could ever have, wouldn't that be great? I know you think we should bike to work, but we don't go to work anymore. So, you know, we're looking for recreational activities. Enough.
Let's do this. If you want to hear the answer about the Bircham Trail, why don't you make sure your name and email address are there, and I can lean on a certain city staff person to give you a response, and I'll try to monitor that to make sure your questions are answered. All right. I want to address the issue of committees that Charlie brought up. The committees will only exist to the extent that they're useful for us. I don't know about anybody else, but I don't have any interest in a process that fragments issues in piecemeal ways that don't create synergy. So I want to try to dispel a fear that the committee structure might somehow inhibit us from all discussing issues that relate to all of these. I think when we originally talked about committees, it had to do a little bit with researching issues, and that it would be a lot for all of us to research everything. And so in a way, these are almost like homework groups in my mind, where we could divide the labor a little bit and lean on each other to do some of that research, so that we could bring it back to the table and sort of put it all together. Does that make sense, Charlie?
Yeah, I'm not anti the committee. I think that's really critical to us digging into the work. I just always know that, you know, sometimes things can get a little narrow where you're not seeing the possibilities because you're not on the other committee. So it's kind of like these issues were all pulled together. We separated them. Let's just make sure to bring them back together. And, you know, it is like, how do we get the funding and make sure the right decisions are made in terms of published priorities that we can defend, and actually have a permanent group that does that kind of work and can review policies and make recommendations. And it all feels pretty integrated to me when I look at all this, and I just have that caution. So that's all it really is.
Appreciate that. I think we're going to get there. I think we're going to get there, and especially to have Sheila's help. I think her work will do a lot toward getting our entire group engaged around all of the issues and figuring out what are the really big issues that we want to focus on going forward. Having said that, I think kind of as a way to just get some more issues on the table, let's go through this work plan. We're skipping background. We're kind of skipping the unified vision for Bike Ped for now. Not that those aren't important. And going to those four main areas. And I think the way we originally talked about this was to do some brainstorming to help each one of those committees understand what we think is important or what needs to be considered. Does that reflect any of your understanding, or do you even remember?
Sounds fine.
Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is use the flip chart to do some recording. And I could just kind of open the floor to, first of all, let's talk about laws, policies, guidelines, and practices. And I would just appreciate it if people would help throw out some of the issues that you think are really important under this area of work, and they don't have to be in any particular order.
Well, maintenance versus new projects, I think, is always a issue, and I think that's what we're hearing in the sidewalk maintenance.
Okay. And does that relate to policies and laws and practices? Or how do you see it relating, I guess I should ask.
Well, I think it relates to work challenges, and I certainly think it relates to practices, because the city staff uses their best professional judgment, tells the city commissioners, here's what we think we should do. And the city commissioners sign off on it, or they sign off on 90% of it and change the other 10%. So I do think those kind of questions relate to this group's mandate.
Okay. Other things, especially for those who maybe aren't on that committee but want to make sure that the committee considers something.
Are we approaching a statute change? Recommendation.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
It seems that the way that the sidewalk maintenance has been handled to date may not be effective, and I'm under the impression that's a city statute.
So you're talking about a new ordinance.
The way that sidewalk maintenance is currently funded.
Right.
And the statutes generally for the Kansas, the state has statutes that has some guidelines on sidewalk maintenance as a responsibility of the property owner, but cities, and we have the city code that is similar, but we would have the ability to change the code to have, say, the city responsible, even though there's still the state statute.
Right.
So
maybe code change is what I mean.
Yeah, that might be considered statute code.
And that's specifically related to sidewalk?
Yes.
And that's affected by ordinance. You make that happen by ordinance. New ordinance. Okay. Change this city code, to this.
Okay, what else?
It's not clear to me who is responsible for educating the public about how to use infrastructure. We kind of always hear the same refrain. Well, we don't, like roundabouts, no one knows how to use them. And I can't point to anybody on staff except maybe Megan Gill who's responsible for that, and I don't think that she would think she's responsible for that either. So it kind of seems like we all know it needs to happen. It's not happening.
Well, Charlotte, that
part of
might be
that is even enforcement, and like if you know what the rules are people following the rules? And these are sort of hand in hand.
Well, Charlie, we're about to select a new city manager. Our city commission's about to select a new city manager. Maybe that's something we should recommend. The new city manager ought to be proponent for the policies of the city. And one of the policies of the city is, better pedestrian safety practices, better bicycling safety practices. Then the city manager ought to get out there and talk about it.
By the way, as an aside, we do have a representative from the police department who's going to be coming on September 28th. Trent McKinley is going to be coming, and he asked, what we want him to talk about, and I gave him several bullet points, including any statistics they have about incidents, whether those be crashes, tickets, warnings issued, that kind of thing. Training of law enforcement officers about bicycle and pedestrian enforcement issues. There were a few other things. Anyway, if anybody wants to forward any additional enforcement-related questions to me, I'll get them to Trent. So we'll be hearing about that.
I could say one of the first, I try to talk other people into commuting by bike. And the minute I bring up riding my bicycle on the streets, the first thing I get thrown at me is, oh, those bicyclists, they run the stop signs, they run the red lights, and they never get a ticket. So that's a big issue with non-bicyclists especially, that the general public is very irritated, from what I can tell, by most bicyclists. and they're not eager to join their ranks, I don't think, because I should say, well, why don't you ride and be a model of good bicycle?
Well, so I've heard from bike advocates that if they were to follow the rule exactly, most motorists would be really disappointed. And the reason is that when they literally act as cars, it can take quite a long time to get a bunch of bikes through an intersection. So, I mean, this is one of those where, the law says this, we ignore the law, everybody gets upset. There's a thing called a Idaho, help me out here, Idaho stop. Anybody?
Like a California, it's a rolling stop, is that what
So
you're-
basically, it's that for a cyclist approaching a stop sign, they're by law allowed to treat that as a yield sign. And if there are other cars, then they have to stop. But if there's no cars, they can go right.
That's true in Fort Collins, too.
In another state, I love that.
Yeah, so,
The thing that we all do anyway.
but the problem is we have people that expect certain things, and then those that are ignoring it, and that's the problem. Like, we have to figure out what the rule is going to be, and then enforce the rule. And if it has consequences, like, bikes queued up 20 deep, and motorists go honking their horn because these bikes won't get through, then, maybe people will change their mind. I haven't seen a lot of that, where there's a lot of bikes, but if there is an organized ride, I imagine that's exactly what would happen if you
Well,
follow the rule.
I think related to that, and it kind of goes back to the education piece of it, is that people think they know what the laws are, and they don't really. A lot of people believe the law is that bicycles should be on the sidewalk, and so there's so there's that piece of it that really goes not only in enforcement, but
Yeah,
lots
that's what
lots more education.
Kind of ignorance of the law
Yeah,
all around.
right.
Also, laws can be
On
changed.
both sides.
The other thing related to infrastructure, kind of the practices, is it does seem in the last couple of years there's been a much greater demand for public involvement in the decision-making about infrastructure projects. And if that's kind of an expectation going forward, then I'm kind of interested in how we can do that better. And, getting out ahead of time to identify the primary issues that are roadways, needs to address in order to satisfy all the different types of users, and having that kind of data gathering be public so that we don't have individuals, making claims around what they know that hasn't been, sort of vetted through more standardized process.
Well, Charlie, it's interesting you bring that up. I was looking kind of on a related topic today, and I ran across the MIT Harvard Public Dispute Project. And they have got a website with all kinds of documents about how to bring together various stakeholders, particularly on contentious issues, and ways to conduct the meetings and elicit the different views and make sure everybody gets heard, and talks about how to analyze the different viewpoints. I thought it was a great webpage that kind of relates to the issue you're talking about. So if you just Google MIT Harvard PDP, that's it, Public Dispute Program.
Could we change
You'll see plenty to
input?
read there.
Could we change input to involvement? Because I know the city quite often has these meetings, and you go, and everybody nods their heads, and when it's over, the project hasn't changed any. No offense meant to city, sometimes you can't. I think one of the Louisiana Street traffic calming project, which nobody remembers, was in the year 2000. The big thing about that, you remember that? You were here.
Chuck remembers that.
We worked on
Compound
that.
fractures healed.
We worked on that for 2 years, and what in a whole organization of neighborhoods, there were four different associations south of campus on Louisiana Street. We worked together, we studied all the issues, we knew that we would not get anywhere if we asked for stop signs or traffic lights, because we had all three-way intersections. So we said, let's not go there. We knew that if we addressed the traffic way, that we end up nowhere, so we didn't go there either. We went to the city with, we have 4 schools, we have this many cul-de-sacs, we have this many driveways, and we have a landlocked neighborhood. Help us. They hired a consultant. The consultant held meetings at the high school, the cafeteria, the auditorium. They laid out maps, and the people from the neighborhood put where they thought different pieces should be. It wasn't, here's a map, what do you think of it? It was, we made the maps. And I really think that we would have been able to pull it off if there had been funding. So I think involvement is more important than input.
I think you're getting to the spirit. What I think is happening is people expect to be involved, and we got to get more confident at that. And then, you know, without the information, people start to generate their own information. You know, so then it's how do we get out ahead of that, so that decision makers can say, "Well, thanks. Well, we actually collected that information, and here it is, and we know, you know, the number of trucks that are on Castle, and we know." You know, whatever else people keep throwing out now. But it feels like we've got to be more systematic ahead of time to understand that. And then be able to line up, you know, here's a recommendation that addresses this concern. And people can feel like the proposal is justified by some of that data gathering.
Marilyn, I think at some point we'll need to take a look at what we do around schools, and are we children, student age children, pedestrians, are we protecting them well enough? Have we done, have we got best practices in Lawrence, or do we just have 1998 practices? And my research into that so far shows that the ordinances relating to school zones in Lawrence haven't been changed since 1998. And I think there's been some safety research since then that might inform how we would design and set up school crossings and things like that. That might be better than we're doing there.
I think one other issue on infrastructure that I've heard, people don't understand when in their neighborhood they have a street that doesn't feel like an arterial, but in fact it is. And 19th Street is an example of that. It's, you know, potentially going to be connected to O'Connell, which, for the most part, if you're trying to get to K10 from this side of town, you're probably going to go down Tennessee, turn left on 19th, stay on it until you get to the end, maybe Harper, right?
Harper, yeah.
So if that's going to just add on another few blocks to get to O'Connell, it's just like our system, our road is going to further encourage people to do that rather than get on K10. And it's justified because the city designated that as an arterial. So it seems like people don't know that they're living on arterials, and yet, you know, they then make future investments in infrastructure. And I think there's a disconnect. People are kind of just not aware until it gets to the point where it's starting to feel like an arterial. The 19th definitely feels like an arterial.
So what's the task that you want
I
to?
think it'd be about somehow making the road classifications more transparent to people. I don't know how you do that other than
There's city ordinance.
You know, somehow there's communication given to people as to what's happening with their neighborhood. 19th Street, Michael had found like the date that it was switched was sometime in 2011. And
Switch from what to what?
I don't know, but it became classified as an arterial in 2011. So people that live there may not have realized that. But yet, once it's kind of in that space, then some other changes might happen. So
Even if they knew that, what difference would that make? Would that have changed it?
well, I mean, I'm not sure you can not change it. It just seems as if this goes back to the education, is people don't know, and then when they find something out, it upsets them. And so how do people become just more aware of, you know, what's going on? And I mean, if 19th is if that's really the plan, then let's just make sure everybody knows that is the plan. And that, if the public says that's not acceptable, the commission changes, I think a lot of things are just kind of understood by a few people. And then it starts to hit the public as if it's kind of some grand conspiracy, and it's been that way for years. And so it's just that kind of, it's hard for the public to know everything they ought to know when they're living their life.
Did you have a brief comment?
I have a comment to that. Having lived all over the United States, Lawrence has so very few what you call arterials. There's so few streets where you can get from east to west or north to south. They're minuscule. They're just so few. Out west, we have all of the cul-de-sacs that came into play when developers thought everybody wanted to live in a cul-de-sac, and that certainly screwed up the grid pattern. But we never have had. There's a certain amount of that even in East Lawrence, where streets don't particularly go through, or they're not maintained, and there's a stop sign every block, so you don't want to use those. So I don't think that people really don't know that 19th is a busy street, even if they're not going to call it an arterial. And I don't think you can, like people taking 27th when 31st was closed. Well, you try a couple of other streets, and then you finally say, oh, I can take 27th, and that'll put me right on Louisiana. That's good. It's kind of like water finding its own level. Motorists look for different ways to get through town until they find the way that works. And, you're not going to change people, probably.
Right. Well, I guess my point is when it's arterial, then it, makes sense that O'Connell connects to it. Because so then those changes, they disrupt neighborhoods, and that's,
Same
kind of,
thing.
and there are several arterials that I would bet that people wouldn't know are designated that way. You're going on just what it feels like, how busy is this? And there are a few of those major ways of getting east,
Or
west, north, south.
can you get through? I mean, that's what makes an arterial. Can you go through?
Right, but there's actually certain streets are designated. It makes impact on their funding, and then how they're connected in the future and stuff like that. So that's the part where I feel like we think we know, and then suddenly we discover, no, the city turned that into an arterial. That's why my street is suddenly double this.
Gotcha. I want to make sure we allow time for all the groups. So are there final comments on this sort of laws, policies, and practices category?
Yeah, just one other thing. I think we talked about the education and enforcement, but we didn't talk about evaluation, and just in terms of kind of transparent and comprehensive approach to evaluation, or and this may be some measures that could be communicated, that would help with the transparency to the community if there were benchmarks identified and then that was being communicated in some systematic approach.
Okay.
Because I know a lot of that is being done, and in the various plans and assessments that a lot of that exists, and it just coming up with a way that it's consumable by the public and more understandable by the public.
Okay. Other final thoughts? This won't be your last time to weigh in on this category of stuff, but it will be for this evening. Quick comment?
Quick, yeah. The three tools I mentioned last week, the benchmarks, the origin destination study, we talked about bicycles, level of service analysis, and then maintenance, methodology, rates index, or whatever, so how to measure. A couple other things, the 20-mile-an-hour ordinance that I mentioned earlier, did you look at? And then possibly a protected bicycle lane policy. So we're not just dealing with the white stripe, but we have a policy about, and not just buffered, but protected bicycle lanes.
I'm going to write that down on here,
Yeah.
even though I already tore it off.
Yeah. And one final thing that gets overlooked, there's a conundrum of how the people who like historically preserving brick streets have an issue with people bicyclists who want a bicycle and they don't like brick streets. So that's going to need to be addressed somewhere, somehow.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, let's, everybody's talking at the same time.
Thank you.
Let's move to project prioritization. What do you have on your mind?
Well, one table that we got a few meetings ago that kind of showed where money had been invested. I think that type of information is really helpful to know, how have we prioritized. Maybe it gets to the evaluation too, that you just mentioned, like how are we telling the community about the investments that are made around improving facilities for people on bikes and on foot. And that was really tough data to look at because it didn't feel like I could decipher trends and really analyze what priorities had been in play. And so maybe figuring out how to refine that, how to better account for it, so people can just understand what are in fact the priorities based on budget decisions that have been made.
Okay.
I think the question about sidewalk maintenance that came up in our earlier discussions and about the, $6 million or whatever that number is, and, recognizing that we need an approach, and also in terms of whether, those are linkages that should be paid for by the city or that should be paid for by the by the homeowner. So, some distinction in terms of prioritization of those projects. And I think David mentioned, looking at the, cul-de-sacs and what the requirements are there versus other linkages. So really that whole framework for kind of cracking that problem of sidewalk maintenance.
Big one, for sure. Okay.
Safety. And when we choose our projects, that should be the first thing in our minds is safety. We should be using our crash data. I don't even like the sound of that word, but it certainly makes us vulnerable. We have a lot of projects around town, and yet when you look at the crash maps, it looks like most of the accidents are happening on 6th Street, and I'm not aware of any pedestrian or bicycle improvements up there. I had more to that thought, but I lost it.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in?
Oh, I remembered it.
Okay.
We shouldn't have to wait for the crashes. We should be able to anticipate where there are problems.
Proactive versus reactionary.
So I was just trying to figure out how to say that. And my difference was it seems like we prioritize what gets, whatever's squeaking. So there needs to be a more proactive approach so that people understand why things are prioritized and nothing's being ignored to the point where it has some legitimacy to be a squeaky wheel. It just takes up a lot of time when suddenly there's someone dealing with an issue instead of it being done proactively.
Well, I think that the whole thing about the health benefits of all of these things should be stressed. And if you're old enough to remember the old jingle, if you have your health, you have just about everything. Well, that's really true. And walking and biking and all this really contributes to your physical health as well as your mental health. And health is a big issue in everything.
Marilyn, can I put up 2 of my slides? I realize I have 12 here, and that's probably too many for the meeting, but if somebody that's driving can hit the prioritization PowerPoint, or do I need to scoot up there?
Yeah, please.
Then you can click through.
Okay. got this slideshow. Anyway, our task force was chartered by the 7106 ordinance, and then we went on and we talked about what ideas we were about, and we talked about environmental, economic, health, and safety. So Dee, I think this piggybacks on what you're saying, is we need to describe all those topics. I think the topics have been described for us already, that those are the 4 general categories we need to look at. And then underneath those, we can look at the contributors to those. And I haven't listed any for health or safety there, I just said criterion. But you can see under environmental, less carbon emissions, consume less fossil fuels. Economic, we talk about dollars all the time. But I think that's something the prioritization committee wants to kind of flesh this out. And then the other idea I want everyone to kind of wrap their heads around is each one of these is not 1/4 of the answer. Because there's 4 of them, our first default math in our head is, the environment is 1/4 of it, and economics is 1/4 of it, and health is 1/4, and safety is 1/4. Probably not. You have to go ask the community what's most important. And you might find out that safety dominates, or you might find out that the economic dominates, depending on who you talk to. So, economic might be 60% of it. And the other ones are only, 15 to 20%. Anyway, that's something that people that work on these things in what's called rational analytic process come up with. Now, I scraped off of the Lawrence Listens questionnaire that Marilyn invited us all to look at, and I just took the first group of, I went through like the first 6 comments or 7 comments, not very many. I got a whole bunch of ideas, and these are what people actually wrote down. I edited them a little bit for clarity. But the ones in green are kind of indefinite or policy or unbounded maybe, and then the ones that are in black are specific projects or specific actions. So I took those 4 out of the first 12, and post crossing guards at the Lawrence Memorial Central Middle School, post crossing signs in the vicinity of Cordley Elementary School, install a 10-foot wide sidewalk on the south side of 23rd from Iowa to Mass, and then make 23rd Street pedestrian crossings more evident to motorists. And I just put on there that maybe there's 30 such crossings. Now, when I look at those in cost, I look at posting a crossing guard, maybe that's like $10,000 a year because those are part-time employees. Posting crossing signs at one intersection, that could be from a couple of $1,000s to maybe $20,000. Now, building a 10-foot wide sidewalk on, what's that, almost a mile there, David? So let's call that 5,000 feet of sidewalk. That's above $100,000. And certainly 10 foot wide, and certainly we'd have to get property, and there'd probably be some places where some fancy engineering and excavation would have to be done. So that might be a $500,000 project. That, just really, it's certainly not a $5,000 project. It's probably like a $500,000 project.
At least.
And then marking every pedestrian crossing, say putting up these latest and greatest LED, flashing yellow LED pedestrian crossing signs. They've got them in Topeka on the north side of Washburn University. So if you're in Topeka, drive down 17th Street on the north side of Washburn University campus, you'll see these fancy new pedestrian crossing signs. And you can put a pair of those in for $10,000 to $20,000, and they're solar, so you don't have to wire them into the electrical grid and stuff like that. So if you had 30 of those, and it cost $20,000 per crossing, there's $600,000. Okay, so I just want to throw kind of the cost idea, just kind of go through that. But then, what do you guys think the other decision variables would help us prioritize these? Okay, the first one to me clearly has a safety component. Second one has a safety component. The third one, it's not so clear there's a safety component, although I agree that there would be. And the fourth one clearly has a safety component. So they've all got that. Now, where's the health ones? Well, C makes the health one, to me, be the biggest contributor to health. And so if you've got any ideas about how you would rank these, what would cause you to rate one of those higher or lower than another one? That's the kind of thing I'd like to hear.
I'd like to know if they're already in a plan. In other words, this is kind of reactionary. Who submitted, who had the capacity, wherewithal to know to submit. And if we're going to chase after every person that submits something, that feels a little bit unplanned to me.
Well,
and I'd like to know that a neighborhood has spent some time looking at this issue, or a school, or some other broader group of the community, other than just one individual who says, "Oh, I want this right here." So for me, it's really important that there's been a process.
So is it a pet rock, or is it part of a deliberate process?
Can we link it back to the regional pedestrian plan, the regional bike plan, the safe routes work, whatever, so that it's not just this kind of, here we go again, I submit something and I get my way because it meets certain criteria. One of the criteria ought to be that it's tied to something that has broader community.
That's fine. And Charlie, I just chose these because, one, they're real. People make real comments about these. Two, they're just examples of projects. And some of them are not real expensive, and some of them are pretty expensive. And so I wanted to have this just as a thought-provoking process.
So my thought-provoked is it ought to be tied to a plan.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to know what the investment looks like geographically. If these are all going to a certain neighborhood because they have a really effective neighborhood coordinator who can get the message out to go post a bunch of stuff, that concerns me. I'd like to know that it's being equitable around the community. I would like to know the economic impact of any of these decisions. So if it's going to potentially be part of a project that's going to bring in KDOT funding and make the investment 4 times the amount that we invest locally, that's a big deal to me. And what else? This is all off the top of my head. So. And the potential use and demand. I mean, if this is in a place that, we have a model that sort of tells us or suggests to us what the demand might be, whether the model is reliable or not, I don't know, but I think it ought to be part of the consideration. Is this likely to be highly utilized? If we continue to make investments in things that don't get use, people are going to continue to say, why are we doing this? So we need that kind of evidence that people do want this. And
that would be tied to the fact that it's in the plan.
Or a neighborhood has gotten
gone
together.
through that process to determine that.
This is very helpful to just think about these, because what I'm noticing
That's all it is.
Yeah,
It's a tool
when
to think
you throw
about.
out ideas like this, health doesn't seem to bounce to the top of any of them as specific projects. But if you look at system-wide in our community and the costs that we have, the burden of chronic disease and everything, there are some pretty big arguments that all these things would be helpful. So I don't know if health is a project-specific. But I don't know. I don't know yet. I don't know what I think about, but I think these are good questions.
And that could be our prioritization rubric has to address things like that. And it may not be, going back to that previous chart, it may not be something that just falls out as a polynomial expression and saying, okay, we're going to take 1/8 of this and 3/8 of that and 20% of this. That probably isn't going to be what happens. There's probably going to be some gut feeling kind of stuff goes into it. But certainly where we can capture data, we should present the empirical stuff and then say, but there's also these non-empirical factors that you might want to consider. And so, go ahead.
Back to your point, Marilyn, I think, thinking about things like access to schools for kids to get, we know that has a health impact, but you're not applying that necessarily to a specific school project, but certainly if routes to school is prioritized, and has the health impact, and then projects is, then there's another layer of prioritization within that goes back to what Charlie said with the planning and where are you going to get the most benefit sequentially. I mean, it's all an incremental improvement. We're not going to do all projects in 1 year or 10 years, so.
And that, to that point, when you talk about schools, you get into other ideas like you have disadvantaged users because children don't have well-developed decision-making skills, don't know personal safety that well. That's why we hold their hand. Maybe when they're in 4th or 5th grade, we start saying, okay, you can drive on the sidewalk now by yourself over to school, but we don't say that for kindergartners and 1st graders usually, unless they can walk with their big brother or sister. So there's the safety aspect of it. There's the protection of disadvantaged users aspect of it. There's the idea that we're protecting our future because those kids are our future human capital that's going to drive our economy. So there's a number of ideas that prioritization concepts that support the idea of traffic safety and pedestrian safety around schools. And some of the other ones are not so widely understood and maybe aren't so widely supported. I think everybody supports kids being safe walking to school. Now, this is my last slide, and what I invite everyone to do is, it's posted on the website. I think, Jessica, you did post these? This is the website we're working off of? Yeah, okay, so you can go on the website, punch up these. This one is for boating. Okay, well, boating isn't pedestrian, but it's a non-motorized, it can be a non-motorized form of transportation. And here's what Fish and Wildlife says. Okay, what does it do? And they ask, they've got 8 questions here, and some of them have multiple parts in the question. So there's a whole bunch of ideas here. Some relate to where the funds come from. Do you have private partners? Is it related to some other plan? So some of these ideas that were brought up earlier are captured in some of these. A lot of the money we get, I won't say a lot, much of the money that we get comes with the golden rule that he who has the gold makes the rules, and they tell us how to prioritize it. They say you can only use this money in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, for example. And you can only use this money for something else. Or you have to score projects according to a certain set of rules. So sometimes the prioritization is made for us, or made for the city staff, I should say, not for us, but for the city staff. But in cases where it's not, I think we should provide some advice to the city staff and have that advice based on empiricism and based on current research. So I'll get down and we'll discussion.
Let's kind of try to wrap up this because I want to make sure we have time for the 2 other areas.
I think one other way that prioritization shows up is when we have competing interests. And what's not captured, I think, in this approach, what I'm not seeing, or maybe you've thought through this, is the public reaction to something. That tends to become a political reality that could kind of disrupt any ambitious prioritization matrix. And how would you are you ceding that there's always a political reality that could do something different, or is there some way to factor that in, in terms of public support maybe being a criteria for decision?
Well, it's certainly empirical evidence that the city commissioners and the planning commission use, and they see that 14 people came in and 12 of them spoke in favor of a planning commission action item and 2 of them spoke against it. And of course, then they kind of weight the quality of the remarks. The 2 people who are against it were really well informed, and the other 14 people were just saying, "Not in my backyard." So that's kind of what the political guys do. But it certainly is, weighing public support is how many people showed up. We signed a petition. We surveyed 500 people. Whatever we did, those things add to the empirical weight of an argument when you say you've consulted more people.
So I think there are some things where the city requires a certain percentage of the neighborhood to say yes, traffic calming is one of those. Is that type of
We can sure we can
criteria,
capture
something
that.
that you think?
Well,
I guess I'm wondering how that fits in.
we've got, so far, and I'm going to apologize to Michael Allman because I asked him to send some stuff and I haven't read through it yet, but my team's identified over 30 different prioritization concepts, ways you could grade something. And I bet when I read Michael's stuff, I'll find another handful on top of that. And so as we read some more, we'll come up with a list of maybe 40 different things, and then we'll say, okay, this one's safety, this one's health, this one's, we can kind of sort them out, and then some of them aren't going to fit at all. And we're just going to have to see how we would apply those. Maybe someone will say, well, okay, we're going to do an empirical process, and these ones fit in the empirical process, and then we're going to look at the empirical results and apply these other factors afterwards. That could be a way we do it. So I'm not presupposing any particular construct of the rubric right now, other than saying I think it ought to have an empirical basis wherever, but not exclude non-empirical inputs where appropriate.
Okay.
Let's ask a real quick question about that before we go on, which is really kind of frustrating. Does the city already have some sort of a criteria, maybe you already mentioned that prioritizes capital projects and how they're done? This seems like you're creating a completely different deal for just bicycle pedestrian stuff that's not based in what maybe you already do as a city.
Well, as far as prioritizing street reconstruction projects, we rate the street based off of 0 to 100 rating on the condition of the street, and that helps guide us to recommend certain streets get reconstruction and they get programmed in the capital improvement program plan and budgeted. But
I guess I was kind of thinking this group would come up with the values, the outcomes that you're looking for, and that's really like how you weight it, and the process is really a city manager, city engineer process that you would go through. Is that kind of where you're thinking you're going with this?
We're trying to build a rubric, so a decision, a
Right, so
logical
what are
process.
they- what are
Logical
they
process.
different?
What are the components of that logical process? What are the considerations that the city staff should make before they recommend future bicycle pedestrian projects?
Okay.
That's kind of what we're
But
trying
kind
to
of
do.
rolled into how they do capital improvement in
Yeah,
general.
and how you do streets, I mean, you're talking, street things, there's a lot of similar projects available like that.
Right, yeah.
So that one, the prioritization is can be a lot simpler.
Right.
Somebody can drive down the street and say, hey, I just ran over 4 potholes, it's time to fix this one. I mean, so it can be really quick like that. Here we've got diverse projects. We've got pedestrian, we've got bicycle.
Right.
We got policy, we got engineering, we got enforcement, we got education. How do we rank those together?
But have you all, I guess what the question I'm trying to get at is, have you all kind of come up with the components of that? You talked about environment, education.
The four that are on that slide are from our charter, our city ordinance charter.
And then have you got kind of down to the next level in
No,
prioritizing?
we have not.
Okay,
We've got
so that's
we've got about
something
40 candidates.
Right, so I guess I'm asking that because the 26, that seems like something that, and rather than kind of have a subcommittee go off and do that, as a what is important or what are you trying to accomplish question, then you would come up with how you would go about and do the criteria following that. Does that make sense?
I think we have an interesting situation in that we have Mike, a task force member who has a lot of professional experience in creating similar kinds of things, and so he may be operating at a more advanced level of exactly what this looks like. And if I'm reading you correctly, you're wanting to make sure that as a citizen committee, we're capturing the values of the citizens.
Right. Do you all agree to kind of what are we trying to accomplish before you kind of get into the
Sure.
criteria? You know what I'm
Details,
saying?
yeah.
I think that you guys need to talk about that maybe on 26. That's what I'm asking is not how the whole weighting and all that would work,
Right.
but just
Well, I think I've got about 40 different value statements.
so maybe if you
So-
send
so,
that to
yeah,
me,
I
we
can-
could do a little questionnaire. ahead
I
of
can
time. Yeah.
send them to Marilyn. Marilyn can forward them to you and say this is what we found in our research so far, and it's just a list right now.
Yeah, that kind of
And
made it a
let me
question.
ask Bonnie here because she's not from the analytics school. She's from the more of the psychology-based school.
Right.
For me, this is way too detailed and professional, as you said. I don't see it as something that we can deal with at a task force level. And what occurs to me is to look at what are other similar communities doing. There's a lot of communities our size that have these advisory councils. If we look at what they're doing and see if they haven't come up with some simpler ways of doing this, that we don't all have to become professionals in the field to understand it, because I can't understand some of this. This is just over my head.
Well, I guess what I was thinking was if you would send me your criteria, you kind of have your
Sure.
statements.
Sure.
I think, I'm sorry, I'm setting down here. I think it would be good for the group to kind of buy off at a higher level of what those items are.
Right.
Before you kind of, and so that, I'm just asking the question, is that what you want to do on the 26th? To me, that seems like.
I defer to the chairman. I certainly think that's a good idea, but that is right in my committee's bailiwick. So yes, we'll spend time with the facilitator on my stuff. Sure, I'm happy with that.
and you know, I guess what I'm thinking is maybe there are some questions that we could send out to you ahead of time if you wouldn't be opposed to doing like a survey monkey, just answer a few online questions, and then when we come to the meeting on the 26th, we kind of have an idea of where do people feel in terms of what do they value and what are the things you're trying to accomplish with your criteria. And maybe that would kind of be a basis to start with. And then in terms of just what other communities are doing, you know, I think you brought this up as a community. There's, you know, what is a walkable community? There's criteria on that. What is bicycle friendly community? There's criteria on what those are. And so we may ask you some other questions about that before the next meeting, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
And I definitely think our first order of business is to have an expression of values, and whether those are values to prioritize like safety and so forth, or populations to prioritize. The specific empirical rubric, to me, is a secondary issue, which may or may not be on our plate.
If we don't get there, we don't get there. I'll do what the chair says.
You have a quick thing, because we're TikTok, and two groups haven't even talked.
I have not given up on the idea that there are some topics that are off-road. For example, new developments, like this one south of town off of Iowa. Does it really have to have a parking lot like every parking lot that ever was? Or can it be something that a pedestrian can navigate without worrying about their lives? Where to put the bus stops, you know, just lots of things that we could be, whether or not we put the storefronts up to the sidewalk. If you're on the sidewalk, how do you get to the storefront? Because it's on the other side of a parking lot, even on 23rd Street. None of those things are on road, and we haven't addressed them. Should we give that up for now? And do that some later date, or what?
This is not our solving thing, but I think getting that on our piece of paper and our list of things to consider is important. Let's go ahead and move on. The next group is funding. So what's on your mind in terms of really the key things to consider when we're talking about funding?
Equity. Making it equitable for everyone.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, people who've lived on the east side of town for many years have paid for the sidewalks as the city has grown to the west. However, the people on the east side do not have good sidewalks. So we have to have a way of distributing them. We don't want to leave the west side out, of course. We have to figure out a way to distribute the money equitably across the city.
Okay. Other points?
I think we certainly need to resolve whether the recommendation is that the city, this is a public good that we all pay for versus a private.
Are you speaking of sidewalk specifically, or all of the facility?
I think the sidewalks are the piece that are kind of left out of that. I mean, we think of roads as something we finance collectively, yet then we have this sidewalk thing that is financed privately. It just seems that seems to be the question. And I imagine if we don't have a recommendation to resolve that, or, we're going to be, people are going to think disappointed then. I had one other thing, but someone else can talk.
Predictability.
Pardon?
Predictability of the funding or allocated to bike ped.
And do you mean by that a dedicated?
Yes.
Other points?
I think quality control, that we're getting what we pay for, quality of the product.
I have one, and that is the citizen appetite for some sort of new tax. I'm not going to call it a revenue enhancement because I don't like euphemisms.
Well, it's not just tax. You can do taxes, you can do bonds, you can do special assessments. I mean, there's all of those public financial tools.
I mean, the current policy requires them to privately pay for it.
Requires what?
I mean, right now, by law, they're expected to privately repair this.
Yep.
I'd love to see the estimate of that cost, really down to the homeowner. And, maybe even go as far as showing them how many people in their neighborhood don't have to pay for that. I think that presses the point. I don't have to pay for a sidewalk because where my wife bought the house, there isn't a sidewalk. But I use everyone else's sidewalk when I walk Bella to school. And I'm willing to pay for it, but current policy says it's not my job to pay for it. It's my job to tell the city when they repair or notify the homeowner down the street that his sidewalk needs to be repaired. And I just kind of like, that's nice gig for me. I don't have to pay for anything. It just doesn't seem right.
Until they all figure out who to snitch.
Well, I mean, one of the
Your house gets
one sidewalk has been repaired just last week. I didn't say anything, but Bella noticed it and was really excited about it. Because she's having to always jump around and,
Seems like maybe the sidewalk thing should be a separate committee because the stuff there is so unique. A separate committee. It's just a separate issue that keeps jumping into everything. And well, what if it's like this? What if we change it to this?
I mean, I think the funding thing, the bulk of it is, you have a public asset that isn't properly financed and maintained.
Yeah.
And no one thinks of it as a private asset. So, I mean, my backyard is my private asset. So that sidewalk is in, a public right of way. It just seems, nowadays people expect the things that were public to be paid for.
So you're talking about reframing it from a homeowner amenity to a public good,
Yeah.
and how that precedes any discussion about funding. Is that what I'm?
Yeah, basically, how do we realize that that's sort of what we already expect? There was a day when I was a kid, my mom and a few neighbors pitched together to buy oil, to put oil on the dirt roads in front of our house. Well, those days are over. Now it's a public good. We pave the roads and no one has to talk to each other anymore. You just pay your taxes. I mean, that's the way the world's changed. So
And then we kind of broaden that impact of cost so that everybody is kind of paying
exactly.
a little at a time.
The same way
instead of an
I'm
impact.
paying for someone else's kid to go to school. I mean now you're all paying for my kids to go to school. But I mean, it's like we share the cost and we all benefit. So the thing about when you start to accept it as a public asset, you realize you have to maintain it. I mean, there's, every asset degrades over time, and so we ought to know how do we sustain that asset, and when we're making big investments in building more, can we do the maintenance of it? And that's probably a big part of that funding challenge even now. How do we maintain, the Parks and Rec is maintaining shared use paths, and that I mean they're actually clearing them of snow So that's not just the cost of repairing, but making it available and accessible all year. Some communities are also
Clear
paying
the shared
for.
path behind my house, so I think the Parks and Rec is doing it.
Yeah, they do it, and it's costing them money every year, and, you know, it's out of their budget. If people are expected to ride to work on a bike in the middle of the winter, and the facility designed for them is covered with snow, that doesn't work. And that's also, don't have enough money to do it in the right way. So there's a huge amount of public investment needs to be made to maintain it.
Other funding issues you want to capture? Michael?
I have 4 ideas. Portland, Oregon, I always have these. Portland, Oregon is instituting something called the Street Safety Utility for sidewalks and bicycle lanes. But they're repairing potholes just for the safety of all users of the street. Rockville, Maryland, and I can't think of what the name of it is, they have some kind of a developer assessment based on square footage, and they pay a certain 5 cents a square foot, whatever, for development. Goes for bicycle pedestrian infrastructure. In Lawrence, the transient guest tax. Other communities understand that a more walkable, bikeable community brings tourism, brings people who want to come and bicycle around and visit and vacate here. That could be combined with things like a bicycle share program where those tourists can easily bicycle. And the 4th one is the gas tax. It has been used in Lawrence before for sidewalks. It can be used for lots of things, not just streets.
Okay.
Clint, could you, you mentioned earlier about diversified funding, and I'm kind of curious what you're thinking. Like, I just, no good reason, but I had sort of imagined there'd be kind of one main funding proposal that would be put out there, but it sounds like you're thinking maybe a little differently about several different things that.
It just seemed like there were multiple options presented so far. I think it was in Chuck Sewell's presentation, there were just some possible ideas, and then in an email forwarded from Maryland earlier this week, just about how the impact of that funding in any way can kind of be broadened over years, or and not only that, but just the diverse avenues. I mean, many are listed right here in the work plan, where we've got, you know, possible taxes or grants, private-public partnerships. Just that there are multiple avenues possible, and that one shouldn't be focused on too strongly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be a mix of strategies. Maybe one that pertains to sidewalk maintenance, and one that pertains to, you know, other things.
I don't know if it may be beyond the purview of this group to determine how each dollar is earmarked, but we could at least kind of get a rough sketch, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe we could say we would more aggressively seek out charitable benefactors. So where's our Andrew Carnegie? Maybe we ought to send a team to go talk up the Gates Foundation, because they're going to get all Warren Buffett's money, so get some of that. I don't know.
I'm just smiling because that's up my professional alley. I don't think we have any Carnegies in this community that we've found so far. Shall we move on so we can give a little bit of time to the citizen advisory structure question? Pardon?
You don't know how to take them.
Yeah, no, I think we're going to be good. We might just hit it about perfectly. I think I've got a few sheets here. Okay. Anybody want to start us off?
Well, the MIT Harvard PDP Public Dispute Project, it goes right to how you manage the stakeholder groups and how you elicit their views in an even-handed manner. And I think that'd be a good place for that. Charlie, I want to tell you how to do your committee, but I just think that might be a good resource for you.
There's always been a gap between the Planning Commission and the Traffic Safety Commission. The Planning Commission makes plans over and over again, they're not safe. And the Transportation Commission, or Traffic Safety Commission, never gets that safety information back to the Planning Commission except through city staff, I guess. So I think if we do something, first of all, it should have authority of some sort, like maybe the Planning Commission, because there's no other group that pulls all of that together, and it should cover policy, it should cover implementation, planning for non-motorized types of transportation.
So you want one more comprehensive, you want a body that's more comprehensive, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I don't know, maybe remake the Traffic Safety Commission, but something that has more authority.
Well, the Planning Commission, by its very name, is supposed to be proactive and look at the impact of, if we change the landscape in this area, here's the impacts on the community. And they ask people to come in and at their hearings and tell us about what you think. I don't know that the Traffic Safety Commission has the same proactive perspective. I think they're more reactive.
Right.
Somebody comes in and says, the speed limit needs to be changed from 40 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour on this street.
However, the Planning Commission is more broad scale.
Well, I guess my one best bumper sticker there is a proactive Traffic Safety Commission rather than a reactionary Traffic Safety Commission. So,
Or traffic planning and safety.
how they relate together, that could be improved, that's for sure.
Other points? I'll say one of the elephants in the room in this whole discussion is that there are existing bodies doing pieces of this work who may or may not have heard about our deliberations and may or may not know that we are considering potentially reconfiguring them. I think that's really a big one. That if we're seriously thinking about recommending some reconstruction of our advisory structure, we need to really dig into that.
Well, clearly those other groups that are pre-existing, they're stakeholders. We're talking about, they've got a portfolio and we overlap with it, or completely or partially, and we're going to recommend that it change in some way, that it focus differently. Certainly the views of those folks need to be taken into consideration.
It was one of the things on our scope of work, wasn't it?
Yes.
Was to
look at the structure of
yes,
committees.
very much so. But I don't know if those committees themselves have had more than just the cursory mention that our group is considering this. The Bicycle Advisory Committee, for example, I think we're thinking that now there's going to be a bicycle pedestrian committee. There's some pretty serious engagement and conversation that has to go on with a group like that to gain their support for something like that. So that's huge.
There's been some discussion at the BAC about that, and so far, it hasn't been discussed again for many months, but or if there was, I missed it. And the general, I think, thought would, I mean, I think generally they'd be opposed to it so far. So,
That's what I'm thinking too.
yeah.
That's why I think that has to be thought through very carefully, and it could involve a sort of a process within a process.
Well, that's where we should get their views on why they think the way they're set up is the best way to crack the egg. And maybe they have very good arguments for that, or maybe their arguments are, you're not going to take over my little fiefdom without a fight. You know, so I don't know what the answer is. I'm not going to presuppose, but I think if you reach out to those folks, invite them to come in and have them state their case. Here's why we're doing a great job on this particular thing, and you shouldn't do anything. Or they might come in and say, you know what, we're doing good on 2/3 of our portfolio. This other third we haven't really done very much with it. If you can help us, make that better, we're all for it. So there might be some areas of common ground, but you need to hear them.
Or is there, I mean, I've brought this up before, but is there, I mean, are there ever advisory committees where there are subcommittees that are sort of permanent subcommittees? So there's, there's people serving on it that are, bike advocates or whatever, interested in the bicycle aspect, and other people who might be interested in pedestrian, or say if you were just gonna combine bike and ped, I guess.
Well, there are examples of like transportation commissions, and then then there are subcommittees of that, and then the representatives on the transportation commission are actually representatives from each of those. So there are different ways to make sure that those are still involved, but to be able to organize it in such a way that there's better cross-communication among the committees. I mean, a couple of things that I read, or one particular piece of research advised generally against combining bike and ped, whether that, that there are probably other views about that as well, but different configurations that, that I think for me, the main goal is how to get better collaboration and communication among and across those entities, and there may be, there may be some need for reconfiguration of some of the tasks, but that going across committees is really important.
I think 7106 gives us the mandate to state that we think the setup ought to be changed. Of course, we'll need to explain why we think the setup needs to be changed.
And we make the recommendation, we won't make the decision.
Exactly. So I don't think we should shy away from it.
I think it's important to remember that one of the reasons why this task force was finally created was because the commissioners and city staff were being inundated with lobbying from a wide variety of groups that was getting to be so time-consuming that it seemed counterproductive. I think there was an expectation, I don't know if it was made explicit, that any kind of citizen advisory structure that could streamline that would be welcome. Doesn't mean we have to go there, but that was part of the conversation for sure. Okay, I'm going to figure out how to get this thing to stay up. Go on there. Okay, there we go. Okay. Well, we're figuring this out. Well, Michael's figuring this out.
Sorry.
Well, actually,
It should just be those two.
Don't anybody bring to other points, I know we're kind of winding down, people are getting tired, but is there anything else that you want to capture in terms of funding?
Well, I think in terms of the advisory committee, I think just
advisory committee.
the point that was made earlier, I think in terms of the relationship of the advisory committees to making funding recommendations, or, you know, their responsibility for funding allocation or recommendations, and what that role should look like.
Well, I know we're almost out of time, but I had put together kind of my attempt to glean, and I may have missed some committees that I'd love to get some feedback on. There's kind of, to me, a long list of committees that are relevant for this discussion. And because they either already have some impact in the kind of built environment that we use, or they do something intriguing, such as social services advisory boards' capacity to receive applications and make funding recommendations to the city commission. So this was my kind of first stab effort. I can't say that I'd have any accuracy on the question about what their role is in terms of the annual operating budget and the CIP. I was kind of hoping maybe David or Chuck or Jessica or someone could maybe look into that question and tell us exactly what is the role, because I think like the BAC provides input, but I don't think the BAC ever actually says this line item should be this or that should be that. And so the Social Services Advisory Board, they seem to have a much stronger role in making funding recommendations. And
That's closer to the model you think we should emulate.
Closer to the what?
well, I'd like
That model that where they
I'm intrigued by that, and I'd like to sort of think through with the group.
yeah.
Like, how different is an advisory committee or a advisory commission or whatever we want to create this into be, so that they actually present a plan that the public can say, you know, if I want to try to impact it, I need to go to this commission, and they're going to be the ones that make the recommendation to the city commission. And I think that just gives a lot more credibility to that body. So it's kind of just in my mind percolating and thinking about trying to tie these issues together about, you know, how do we as a community prioritize? And who's the body that's going to make those recommendations to the ultimate governing body?
Yeah.
How do we, you know, recommend around funding decisions to the body that will ultimately, you know, approve the budget and the CIP, so that the community understands the process. It really involves whatever this advisory body is, that they need to engage, and, you know, maybe that helps to create this streamlined process, because staff are all looking at that committee to say, you know, here's what we think you know need to consider, and there's the public telling us what they think, and then you got to make decisions. And I think that helps the city commission then to feel like there was a really, you know, transparent process for the public to get input.
I think it needs to be an enduring process. It shouldn't be a one-shot thing. I mean, the task force is a one-shot thing, but what Charlie's committee comes out with, and what I hope we adopt at the end of this, is an enduring. We recommend an enduring structure that will, you know, as far as, I won't say in perpetuity is way too far, but you know, has a mandate that goes out for decades to look ahead, and we anticipate that 20 or 30 years from now, this thing would still be perking along and helping us out. So I think the concept of endurance is important rather than just saying it.
I would also, I mean, you guys might have other ideas as staff, like the sales tax audit committee is another one that came to mind. You know, here's a committee that has some role in trying to oversee how we're using money that was you know, authorized for investments in, you know, infrastructure, including bike peds. So, like, those examples of current committees could inform what this new committee might do. I'm also curious, like, I don't know, I think the Community Development Advisory Committee has representation based on certain criteria, so it's not exclusively just the mayor appoints anyone they want. They have to have some qualifications, and that could be helpful to say that there has to be a certain composition based on, you know, the parts of the community you live in, who you're representing or whatever. So I think one question we have to figure out is what's our recommendation around the composition and how that selection or, committee selection happens. And then what the role of that committee is going to be.
Marilyn, do you mind if I share a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one thought that comes to mind is the Social Service Advisory Board, our committee.
Yeah, it's on one of mine. That's the last one on my list.
Okay, yeah, that's...
Yeah, because it's that was one of those where they do
Sort
make
of,
these
yeah.
funny recommendations and people are applying for it.
Yeah, but then when I think about that, I think about that's just kind of a transactional process. It's not trying to accomplish a big picture goal for the entire community. It's just suggesting appropriations to specific purposes, by way of the agencies that are receiving those. So that's my only input is just that the budget is designed to reflect those bigger picture priorities of the city commission and of the community. But it is just 1 year. It's a snapshot in time. So I think it would just be important to factor that.
I listed them there because of that sort of unique feature they have. But I think it's important to look at their impact on operating budget and the CIP. So this is where I don't really know the answers to this. I said yes, no, unknown. I'm kind of curious, is the CIP just completely driven by staff, or is there a committee that has some authority, and which committee is it? So just that's what I'm thinking. Is this we make this CIP is 5 years and the annual budget is every year. I would hope whatever this body would be attentive to, sort of responsive to requests of the community, but also looking at what the plans are, and not being beholden to the whatever is kind of popular at the moment. Because those plans there's a lot of energy into why we don't have a safe routes plan yet. We've been working for a year. And so the transportation plan, there's a ton of work put into that. So that body needs to really understand those things and know how to take sort of the pressing issues in the community and look at the long-term interests and figure out, here's the best thing we could recommend to the city commission. By all means, the city commission can do what they want, but there has to be a sense that the city commission can trust the stewardship that this body can provide.
Thank you, everybody. That's a lot of output, and it's going to have to be processed in a variety of ways. Sheila, do you have any thoughts now after you've listened to all this about how we move into the next phase?
Right, I think I did say earlier, I think we kind of need to, maybe for the 26th, maybe step back to help the different committees kind of before they go on their tasks of doing their work. What outcomes are you trying to, what are problems you're trying to solve? What are they? What priority are those problems as a result of the resolution that we have and the charge? And then what outcomes are you trying to accomplish so that when you're doing your work in committees, you are thinking with that framework maybe in mind before you can start with your more detailed recommendations. So if I would send you a questionnaire between now and then, would you fill it out? And then we can kind of start with that at the beginning maybe of the meeting.
I think that would be really helpful. So people can record their thoughts and we can get a summary right off the bat at the top of the meeting.
Okay.
What we had talked about, I want to make sure that this makes sense to all of you, for Saturday the 26th, is that we would convene at 8. We would have 1 hour of sort of preliminary conversation, and then at 9 o'clock we would have the public meeting, and so we'll advertise that as beginning at 9 a.m. and somewhere around 10 o'clock have a break. So I'm wanting to put some limits on that public meeting. with the hopes that we can be efficient and effective with that time, rather than, a 2.5-hour meeting that uses some valuable time that we may want for other purposes. So 8 a.m. we convene, 9 a.m. the public comes in until around 10:15. There's a break. We ask the public, or we say thank you for your input. We come back, and then we continue with the facilitated discussion and go from there. And then, based upon the conversation that we have, Sheila may want to do another questionnaire, or there may be some sort of homework for you to do between that and that session and the October 7th facilitated session. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you see us doing on the 7th? Because I'm kind of...
Right. I think it kind of depends on how far we get on the 26th, but then we would take the work that we did on the 26th and maybe try to provide more detail to that in terms of drafting some sort of preliminary recommendation document that really has kind of an outline of the types of things you want to think further about, but recommend eventually to the City Commission. So it would be kind of a framework that you could work on, and so we'll try to get that discussed and kind of figured out during the 7th. And then I think you had talked about maybe then your final meeting in October, you would work on that as it were here.
Right, so we would have a draft to present to you on October 26th that would been drafted by Sheila and her group, and then there will be probably me and city staff will do a little bit of communicating with her about tweaks that we might see to that. And then your first presentation would be on October 26th. At that point, we then have, gosh, time is going to be flying past then. November meetings, December meetings. So I see us on the 26th reviewing this document and trying to develop what our work plan is for the rest of our period of time together, kind of for November and December. We'll probably want to schedule at least one more public meeting when we have a preliminary report, so that the community members that want to can read it and review it and come and give feedback on it. That's to be scheduled. That's at least what I'm proposing. Thoughts about any of that?
Probably will you be advertising the public part on September 26th?
We're going to have Megan Gilliland hopefully get a press release out tomorrow. So it'll go to the Journal World, the media. Charlie has also been working on a list of all of the sort of identifiable stakeholders that are on current committees and commissions. We have some 150 email addresses of people who have been receiving our agendas and information, and that's the emails that were generated by a community campaign to try to get the commissioners to dedicate a little funding in the 2016 budget. If you remember, that didn't really happen in our process, but a little bit concurrently. So those have been identified as stakeholders, and I would say anybody, I would hope that you would all use your personal social networks and organizations and stuff to help spread the word about it. We're going to have to get the word out pretty quickly.
So the hope is to get a big crowd.
I mean, yeah. I don't know how you define big. What I also want to make sure of is that people who can't make it on Saturday at 9 a.m. have an opportunity to give input online. So our question on Lawrence Listens is still open. So if you talk to somebody that they are interested in giving input but can't attend the meeting, that's one option.
Let me in her press release.
I'll add that in.
And on the event, could she create a Facebook event?
Okay.
She's done that with some other things, and it makes it easier to share it out, invite people to it.
Okay. Other thoughts about publicizing the meeting? Okay.
Where will it be held?
The plan is at the East Lawrence Rec Center. There was some concern mentioned at the last meeting about whether that room would be big enough. I'm told it seats like around 50 to 60 people. Unless we see some groundswell of interest, I think that's going to be big enough. But I think we could change it if we had to. Might be a little hard to make sure we get the word out on that, but that's the plan. The East Lawrence Center, there's a meeting room there, plenty of parking. Any final business tonight?
Approve the minutes.
The minutes.
Just that 10.
Madam Chairman, I propose we approve the minutes.
Second.
A motion is second. Any discussion on that? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Whoops, I hear something behind me.
Oh, it is. You want to
What do
say
we got
something?
here? Is this something you can give to us in writing?
No, this is something I want to give to you.
To
I will
Marilyn?
present this to the Pedestrian Bicycle Issues Task Force. It's a document I've been referencing for 3 years. It was drafted in 1976 by city planner Miles Schachter. It's the original pedal plan for Lawrence. It's an amazing document. It's prescient. It has elements for incorporating bicycle facilities in the capital improvement plan. It actually has a capital element to the plan, capitalizing specific projects shown on this map, prioritized in 5 tiers. And it's telling that bicycle plans ever since this one, the capital element was removed. So this kind of set the tone, but it wasn't followed. So anyway,
Lay it on me.
that's pretty cool. I got a copy from Miles Schachter and it was presented to the City Commission in June of 1976.
Marilyn, could we have it scanned and put it on the...
Sounds like we already.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
We work on that, Jessica?
Copy of it.
Okay, we were working on motion to adjourn.
Second? First? Or?
Okay, Bonnie moves. Pat,
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you bright and early on Saturday, the 26th.
So did you write that grant or not?